Hey Bookworms, Matt here again. Today I want to have a look at how you craft an excellent magic system. I'm going to be looking at this from primarily the perspective of a novelist. That's the kind of writing I do, but a lot of these tips I think will work for whatever medium you're interested in, whether it's writing, even if it's just reading and understanding how authors do a good job at crafting these things. A lot of this information for me has come from research I've done independently on how to become a better author. Looking at interviews, lectures, reading books, and I feel I've been able to understand to a pretty good extent how you create a good system. Now, this isn't to say that I'm some expert at putting that into practice. I'm still learning. But I think we all are, even some of the best authors still struggle at times, but this doesn't mean that the work they produce is bad by any means. So the first thing we need to look at is, do you want a hard magic system or a soft magic system? So those are two concepts, you might not have heard of them. Basically, you can see them as hard magic is more magic as science. A hard magic system is a magic system that you want to really define. You want to define, not necessarily like as you're going along writing it, but before you even start your story, you need to come up with, what are the powers? You need to come up with why do these powers exist, how they've affected the world. And understanding this allows you to solve problems more. Brandon Sanderson, my personal favourite author, wrote an essay on his laws of magic systems. The first of which is that an author's or a storyteller's ability to solve problems with magic, and this could be science fiction as well, such as the ODM gear in Attack on Titan, but any mystical or new technology or magic that we don't have in the real world, your ability to solve conflict or problems with that is directly proportional to how well does the audience understand that system. What this basically means is that compared to soft magic, which is designed more to mystify, with a hard magic system, often your magic is going to be a much more influential part of your world and your story, because you're going to be using it a lot more to solve problems. So why don't we look at an example? A good example of a hard magic system is Avatar: The Last Airbender. In Avatar, we've got 4 central kinds of magic. We've got earthbending, firebending, waterbending, and airbending. And each of these have very clearly defined powers with backstories to match on how they've been acquired. And whilst maybe the backstories weren't completely communicated, what's more important is that the audience understood very quickly on how you need to have specific mindsets in order to be able to do the bending, what the general capabilities of a good bender are, whilst allowing room for progression and extras such as Sozin's Comet or metal bending. And because of this, we as the audience see bending used to solve a variety of different problems. The story is centered around Aang, and his character arc is him learning to use all of these different magics to solve the conflict of the plot, defeating the Fire Lord. And we get really in-depth things such as Katara running on the spot, so she sweats, which allows her to waterbend her sweat to escape a wooden prison. Meanwhile, an example of a soft magic system is Lord of the Rings. Specifically, we'll look at Gandalf. In Lord of the Rings, Gandalf's powers are never really defined. It's more Gandalf does crazy stuff, and it's cool. But let's look at the first book, Fellowship of the Ring. In that, when they're in the Mines of Moria and they're being chased by the hordes of orcs, and then later the Balrog, Gandalf barely uses his magic at all until right at the end, when he stops the Balrog from crossing the bridge, costing him his own life, and effectively his magic is stopping the bridge. And spoilers, I know he's later resurrected and does other weird stuff, but his powers are never really explained, and because of that, him dying there makes sense. Now, let's compare this. If we had Aang, who we know exactly what he's capable of, exactly how he's capable of using different gusts of water, fire, earth, and air, if we had Aang in that situation, we would be able to have a completely different scene, where perhaps Aang is able to bring down all of the mines to get all of them out safely, because we know what he's capable of, and that seems fair. If Gandalf out of nowhere was to just do some magic stuff that annihilated the entire, Balrog and all of the orcs, it wouldn't feel earned. This is really important when you're creating a magic or a sci-fi technology, is this concept of it feeling earned. You basically want it to not feel like a Deus Ex Machina. I guess like a good example of that might be in Game of Thrones, where there's the scene where I think it's Melisandre births a shadow demon that assassinates, I think it's Renly Baratheon. Sorry, Game of Thrones spoilers. If you haven't seen it by now, I mean, come on. But you can see how that doesn't feel as earned. We have no idea what the powers are. We have no idea why that isn't used in future. And it just feels like a plot device that was added without any real thought as to what the consequences would be on this world. That's another thing to consider with your magic systems, is how do these things relate to the real world? In Avatar, we see these different cultures have been affected by the bending that is present. So, we have the waterbenders have set up cities made of ice in the poles, which makes them virtually, completely impossible to invade, because you're going into their home territory of waterbending. Meanwhile, the firebenders have set up, have a very aggressive kingdom and use their fire for destruction, and that has influenced them to have that culture. So you can see that the more developed you make your magic system, the more you see how it influences the world around you, the more immersive it feels. The next thing I want to talk to you about is logic. Mainly internal logic versus external logic. You need to have both of these for your magic system to feel earned. So what are these two different things? So you can think of internal logic as consistency. You don't want it to feel like in one scene or one part of the story, one character can do one thing, and then in another they either can't do that or they can do something far stronger with no real earned explanation why. Imagine if in Avatar: The Last Airbender, Aang learnt to use firebending in the first series, and then just didn't use it. That would be a flaw with internal logic, because it leaves the reader wondering, why isn't he using this magic? Similarly with that Game of Thrones example, we wonder, well, why isn't Melisandre birthing loads of shadow demons to assassinate all of his other enemies? Why just Renly Baratheon? That is a problem that can take you out of the world. So basically what you want is consistency. And this doesn't mean you always have to define what they do. I was watching a Brandon Sanderson lecture, which I recommend you watch his series of lectures online, by the way. But he was basically mentioning the example of how internal logic can mean Gandalf does crazy stuff, and we don't know what that stuff is, but it's always on a similar power level. He seems to have some ability to maybe sense the future or do cool stuff when it's necessary, but he doesn't single-handedly nuke entire armies. His power level seems on a similar level throughout the whole books, and that leaves us with a sense of internal consistency. Now, what's external consistency? External consistency is basically communicating to the reader an explanation that immerses them in the world. So, Brandon also mentioned the example here of poorly done external consistency, although addressed, but poorly done external consistency, would be Superman. Superman, we're told, gets his powers from the sun, and gets crazy powers like flying and laser vision, which obviously makes no sense and kind of takes you out. And we're also told, oh, that's why kryptonite is his weakness, because it's from his home planet. That feels unearned. It's an explanation that doesn't really immerse the reader and takes them out, because you're wondering, well, that doesn't really make any sense. Now, a better example, if we're sticking with superheroes, let's say of external consistency, might be Iron Man. You know, we're told, you know, he's this super genius, so that's why he's the only one who can really create this stuff. And we're shown how, you know, in the first film, how he uses basically just different, like, giant suits of armor parts to forge with, like, poorly made rockets on his boots and stuff to create the first prototype, which he builds on and builds on and builds on. And we understand that he's using very complex engineering that only he can do to create this power, this suit of armor. That feels a lot more earned, and it immerses the reader a lot more, or in that case the audience, because they can buy that. You know, I can buy the idea, yeah, Iron Man could exist one day, but I can't buy the idea Superman could exist one day with the explanation we have for his powers. So that's the important thing you have to consider with external consistency. Okay, now time for the fun bit. What is your magic capable of? Honestly, you can go nuts here. You can really go in any direction you want, but there are two main things I want you to consider. The first of which is Brandon's third law, which states that a magic system that explores a few powers fully in every extent to how they influence the world, to how they change the characters, to how, like, what requirements they have, is going to be more interesting, way more interesting in fact, than a magic system that has a million different capabilities, none of which are fully explored. The rule here is that the more content you're creating, the more powers you can explore. So, for example, Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, that Brandon Sanderson finished, has an extreme amount of capabilities in regards to the one power, but that series is 14 books long, 15 if you count the prequel, so he has the room to really explore how all of this has influenced the world. You don't have that. Unless you're planning on writing a 14-book epic yourself, you really need to think more specifically about what powers you want to create. Elemental bending in Avatar is a great example of this, because as prior mentioned, we only have 4 magics for the main part, and all of these are fully explored to, you know, how they've influenced each of the different cultures surrounding them, how they're used to influence military, culture, religion, politics. We see it all. And this leaves the world feeling fantastic. You know, we're writing fantasy or science fiction, you want that to feel earned. If you're going to have it where every character can do different things, your world just won't feel really explored enough. It will feel very one-dimensional. It won't feel deep, and you want your world to feel deep. Now, the second thing to consider is Brandon's second law, which states that flaws and limitations are what truly make a magic interesting, not its capabilities. I know as writers and creators and world builders, we can get lost in the idea of creating this really deep magic system where you can do everything from fly to create fire to ice to slowing time, whatever you find interesting. But the problem is that what really engages a reader is the flaws placed on the characters. The characters are what drives any story more than anything else. So, say for example, Mistborn, which is Brandon Sanderson's series, and a really good example of this. The main power of a Mistborn, or the most notorious one, is that they can move metal. They can pull it towards them or push it away, but it has to go directly towards them instead of Magneto in X-Men, where he can through telekinesis move metal in any way, effectively becoming a god. By having this limitation, it makes the characters have to solve problems in a much more interesting way, because they have to think, they have to come up with complex solutions to solve the problems you've put them in. This in two ways makes the writing or direction or whatever you're doing more interesting, because not only are the characters having to think harder to solve their problems, but you as the writer are also having to work harder, because obviously you can't just solve it easily, and because you can't solve it easily, you're going to think harder about your writing, which will lead you to write better. On top of that, limitations can also mean costs. So in Mistborn, you can't just do the magic willy-nilly. You have to down a vial of metals, which you burn as fuel. Without metals, without fuel, you can't use the magic. It's as simple as that. And we see the consequences of the characters running out of metals. Similarly, in the Wheel of Time, if you use the one power as a male, you will eventually go insane and kill everyone you love. And even if you're a woman using the power, you can still accidentally burn yourself out and lose the magic for good, if not accidentally killing yourself with some horrible magical accident. So that is what makes a magic more interesting than the powers. Now, this isn't to say just do something really bland. Go nuts, come up with something really interesting that you think is unique and you love. But just remember to keep in mind that having these costs will make your characters solve these problems in much more interesting ways, and will overall make your story come across much more engaging. Well, with that, we're done. I hope you found some useful stuff in this video. Remember, the most important rule of storytelling is that no rule is absolute. You can go crazy with these rules and do whatever you want. I personally think hard magic systems are a lot more interesting, but that doesn't mean that soft magic systems aren't bad. One of my favourite books of all time, The Alchemist, has a soft magic system. It's based in the real world, but it still comes across great. It's one of the most popular books of all time. You don't have to obey these rules fully. They're just something to keep in mind, and rules that I have found have made my writing better, and I think will hopefully make your writing better too. So if you like this video, please hit like, please subscribe. The more help you guys give me, the more videos of these I can make, and it helps let me know whether you like this kind of content or want something else. So please let your thoughts go down in the comments as well below. But with that, we're done. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.